everyone, I'm Dia DeVay,
Alexa Rodriguez,
Dipti DeVay,
and we're back with another episode of ADD News. Before we get into our current information, let me introduce a recap of our previous episode. The last years marked an increase in military efforts in the prolonged Vietnam War. Across the nation, we witnessed large-scale student-led protests against the war, agonizing war hawks and exhilarating anti-war doves. We've also witnessed a variety of public protests for African American civil rights, resulting in President Johnson's Revolutionary Civil Rights Act. That concludes our recap, so let's move on to Dipti DeVay and Alexa Rodriguez with today's national and foreign news.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the World News segment. Today, Soviets have taken a big lead in the space race after succeeding in getting the first man-made probe to orbit the moon. On March 31st, the Soviet Union launched the Luna 10 mission with a fueled mass of around 1,350 kilograms attached to a 245-kilogram lunar orbiter module into space. They had initially launched it on March 1st, but it quickly failed. After a few repairs and revisions, they launched it once more, resulting in success. With this, astronomers were given live footage of the moon in its orbit. This is a huge step towards space development. Will the U.S. be able to top this?
Now moving on to U.S. news. The decision in Miranda versus Arizona case has finally come. This landmark case began in 1963 when criminal Ernesto Miranda was arrested with a lack of awareness of his rights before police interrogation. Being mentally unstable, Miranda would have required a counsel present during the police interrogation. However, Miranda did not get these protections and appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court, asserting that the police gained the confession of his crime unconstitutionally. The Arizona Supreme Court sadly declined, leaving Miranda with no choice but to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1966. Today, on June 13, 1966, the case has finally been concluded. Led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, the Supreme Court ruled that the case went against the Fifth Amendment, which protected individuals from testifying against themselves in a case, and the Sixth Amendment, giving the right to an attorney to a criminal defendant. As a result, the court formed a series of statements calling Miranda rights to be recited by the police when a defendant is being interrogated or detained. Hopefully, these improvements revolutionize the way offenders' rights are defended in the future to allow the nation to give justice to all. A new strive for women has come with the creation of the National Organization for Women on June 30th. This organization pledges to unite women across the country to stand up against sexual harassments in the workplace and other female injustices in American society. Attempting to punch the glass ceiling above, now strives to pressure those in power to protect female reproductive, economical, and social rights. Stand up, my ladies, because it's our time to gain equality.
News just came in that on June 30th, Charles de Gaulle, President of France, has announced France's withdrawal from NATO and has ordered all foreign troops out of the country. De Gaulle claims that France is determined to regain on her whole territory the full exercise of her sovereignty, and would therefore stop putting his military forces at NATO's disposal. Despite this news being sudden, it was not completely unpredicted. France had slowly been disengaging from NATO participation for a while and had growing conflicts with most NATO allies, specifically the US and Britain. It all started in 1956 after the Suez Canal incident, when the US forced France to withdraw its forces from the area around the Suez Canal during the conflict over the nationalization with Egypt. De Gaulle, feeling his power was being threatened, suggested that France, the United States, and Britain be given equal footing in NATO. The proposal was quickly rejected, however. From that point on, tensions between France and the US began to worsen. In 1963, the US and France argued over a plan to have NATO nations man a North Atlantic nuclear fleet. In the end, de Gaulle planned his own nuclear fleet, which led to France's participation and the decision being withdrawn. With all of this, de Gaulle decided to leave NATO, stimulating many questions about the stability of the NATO alliance.
Breaking news! Just a few minutes ago, on July 17th, Robert Speck was arrested at Cook County Hospital. Just 3 days ago in Chicago, Illinois, Speck murdered 8 student nurses in their townhouse, robbing them in the process. One woman, Corazon Amaro, managed to escape the townhouse in the morning and contact police, who made a detailed sketch of Speck's figure. Last night, Speck attempted to commit suicide in order to escape punishment, but was found this morning. Because of fingerprints on the scene of the murder, Speck was speedily convicted and given a death sentence. There have just been photos surfacing of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. leading a march in Chicago on August 5th. King claims to be leading this march in support of equal housing laws for African Americans in white Chicago neighborhoods. This march was inspired by injustices African Americans face regarding housing, where blacks are typically segregated in low-quality homes in underdeveloped parts of neighborhoods, which further lessen their power, along with the heightened susceptibility to poverty and unemployment. Though this march was set up for good intentions, the results were uncompromising and the march ultimately failed.
Introducing the newest, freshest, most trendy hairdresser in all the United States, Ultracuts. This salon features some of the most stylish hair trends of the decade. The Beehive, which piles one's hair in a cone-like shape atop one's head, vaguely resembles a beehive and requires tons of hairspray. The Flip Bob, popularized by the former First Lady Jackie Kennedy, features a special hairdo where the ends of the bob flare outward to create this iconic look. Even more radical of a hairdo, the Vital Sassoon cut, is perfect for the new craze for short pixie cuts with its sharp, angled style. We also have exclusive hair accessories that are in high demand in this day and age, such as the beautiful pillbox hats and the stunning headscarves. Make sure to stop by for a wonderful hairdo. You won't regret it.
Hello, in today's World News segment, we will be discussing what is currently going on in China. A few months back, Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong had announced what he calls a cultural revolution to reassert his authority over the Chinese government. Zedong felt that the country was moving too far in a revisionist direction, focusing on expertise rather than an ideological purity. His power within the government had been decreasing after the failure of the Great Leap Forward and the economic crisis that followed. To revise the country to what Zedong believed would be perfection, he shut down the nation's schools and called for a massive youth mobilization to revive the revolutionary spirit. The students began to form paramilitary groups called the Red Guards, attacking elders and anyone they suspected to be disloyal. Mao Zedong urged the citizens to rid themselves of the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas, in order to reach peak conditions. Since then, the Red Guard children have formed what seems to be a personality cult around Maoist thought, similar to that seen during Joseph Stalin's days. This new direction of China is bringing fear to the U.S. government, wondering if it will sprout about another wave of extreme nationalism and communism. Before we move on today, we have some quick updates on America's position in the Vietnam War. As of the most recent report, there are about 400,000 U.S. troops stationed in South Vietnam, and we've recently been informed that earlier this year, in the middle of June, American aircrafts attacked Hanoi, the capital of North Vietnam, and Haiphong, a major port city. We, however, have no information on how many were wounded. That is all for today. Thank you for tuning in.
On to our culture segment for the year 1966, I would like to introduce to you all the hit TV series Batman. Airing 2 days a week from January 12th this year, this live-action television series has captured the attention of many individuals, both young and old, in our nation. Starring Adam West and Burt Ward, this show is a nationwide sensation, drawing in thousands of viewers every time a new episode airs. Make sure to watch the next episode of the show on ABC tonight. On a more serious note, the overuse of psychedelic drugs has been impacting the young all around our nation. The use of drugs like LSD and marijuana have been escalating and contributing to the youth culture of the 60s. These drugs are raising major health concerns, as its use can lead to addiction and may even cause injury to the body, like death. We encourage those out there who have friends or family to strongly consider taking provisions to reduce the mainstream use of drugs in order to keep Americans safe and healthy.
Welcome back, viewers! I'm glad to give you all another edition of A Year in Review Economy Edition, which discusses the annual changes in our nation's economy plus a fan favorite about this year's American inventions. Without further ado, I will proceed with our economic wrap. The effects of the Vietnam War caused a heightened focus to military production, an expensive and expansive operation that increased American production but put a big dent in our budget. The United States budget was cut so far that President Lyndon B. Johnson struggled supporting food and munitions and thus drew back on fighting. Our gross national product of this year was at $824.18 billion per capita income of $4,190. Additionally, our national debt reached $320 billion with a 39% debt to GDP ratio. Yet though we had a few setbacks regarding our economy, we witnessed a variety of American inventions. The Carter phone, invented by Thomas Carter, linked radios and telephones, mobilizing someone on the radio to talk with someone on the telephone. HP's first computer, the Hewlett-Packard 2116A, marks the introduction of integrated circuits in HP's products. Lastly, Ralph Baer's The Brown Box revolutionized gaming in the first multiplayer and multi-program video game complex. Though other inventions were introduced in 1966, you all can find those on your own. Thank you for listening to our broadcast.
News has just come in that the fighting that took place between Israel and the Egypt-Syria-Jordan alliance that started on June 5th, now being called the Six-Day War, has just come to an end. There were already high tensions because of many military strikes happening between these countries. However, Soviet reports claiming that Israel was planning a military campaign against Syria set these tensions aflame and fighting began. As Egypt prepared itself for war, Israel launched the first attack with a preemptive strike against Egypt and Syria, marking the beginning of the battle. In response to the apparent mobilization of its Arab neighbors, early on the morning of June 5th, Israel staged a sudden preemptive air assault that destroyed Egyptian and Syrian air forces. Within just 3 days after the commencement of the war, Israel was dominating and captured the Gaza Strip and all of the Sinai Peninsula up to the east bank of the Suez Canal. The UN Security Council called for a ceasefire on June 7th, which was immediately accepted by Israel and Jordan. Egypt would soon follow and accept the next day, and Syria would fight on a few days longer, but finally accepted the ceasefire on June 10th after Israel launched an attack on the fortified Golan Heights. The Arab countries suffered from heavy losses. Egypt's casualties numbered more than 11,000, with 6,000 for Jordan, 1,000 for Syria, and 700 for Israel. The Six-Day War intensified the problems plaguing the Middle East and led to a standoff between Israelis and Palestinians. Hello and welcome back to the Daily World News segment. Today we have some good news on the Cold War. President Lyndon B. Johnson and Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin met up for 3 days from June 23rd to June 25th in Glassboro, New Jersey. Fear of the Cold War becoming a hot war had begun to rise after the increasingly hostile atmosphere around the world, such as the Vietnam War and the Middle East, so many were shocked to hear that the two opposing leaders were willing to assemble for a small meeting. After compromising to meet somewhere in the middle of Washington and New York, the leaders got together and discussed the most pressing issues threatening world peace, like the Six-Day War and the nuclear arms race. During the span of those 3 days, President Johnson and Kosygin met up for almost 10 hours. Though no major agreements were signed at Glassboro, our president labeled the conference a success, calling it the spirit of Glassboro when referring to the improved relations with Moscow. This little positivity has lit a flame of hope in the hearts of many citizens throughout the world, believing peace will prevail. That is all for today.
Switching concerns to domestic issues, the civil rights riots in Newark, New Jersey and Detroit, Michigan that started on July 12th finally ended today on July 17th. These riots were sequential to the infamous Watts riots in 1965 after President Johnson passed the Voting Rights Act. The riot in New Jersey started because of extensive police brutality toward an African-American male, resulting in days of rioting, arson, and assault in the neighborhood to demand better treatment of blacks. The Detroit riots sprang up because of a police raid on an illegal drinking club, causing a similar situation of unrest in the community. I hope that all of the community members stay safe and can achieve their goals soon. We have just gotten a top-secret insight on President Lyndon B. Johnson's handlings of the anti-Vietnam War citizens in the United States. By the looks of it, Johnson has called the CIA to spy on anti-war civilians within the United States, presumably under the impression that those people expressed opinions that breached the nationalism for the war. This action, however, directly contradicts the CIA's function as a counterintelligence overseas because of its application to Americans inside of our country. Additionally, Johnson expresses an urgency for the FBI to turn its program COINTELPRO against anti-war dubs. With numerous reports of false accusations that some anti-war campaigners are communist sympathizers rapidly being released, the FBI is beginning to look like a totalitarian police rather than a protector of democracy in the United States. For all the dubs out there, stay safe and, a word of advice, try to be less open about your beliefs until the situation clears up. Now let me introduce you to some of the hit songs and music trends of this year.
I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright blessed days, dark sacred nights, and I think to myself, what a wonderful
or in the darkest night, no one knows. She comes and goes.
As you can see, the rise in rock and roll has really left an impact on this year. With record-breaking storms the past few months, the Atlantic hurricane season of 1967 seems to be clearing soon. Beginning on June 10th, this hurricane season was significant in that it was the first Atlantic hurricane season to occur in the modern-day satellite era. With a total of 8 storms and 36 depressions, This hurricane season seems to be coming to a close today, Thursday, November 30th. Owing to a whopping $235 million in damages and 79 deaths, this hurricane season certainly left an impact on the nation and its people. We are all relieved that these disruptive months of the hurricane season are finally over, just in time for the start of the holiday season. Make sure to enjoy this weather and spread the holiday cheer. Back to you, Alexa.
Thank you, Dipti. There have been major updates for the Vietnam War. The Battle of Duc Tu, which started on November 3rd, has just ended, and it was a U.S. and South Vietnam victory. They were led into battle by Major General William R. Pierce with 16,000 men ready and equipped. After battling for 20 days over the district of Duc Tu, the Americans took the top of the hill after finding that the North Vietnamese had already surrendered and departed. By the end of the battle, the Viet Cong around Duc Tu were so battered they were forced to withdraw back across the border. This battle cost 376 U.S. lives with 1,400 wounded, 79 South Vietnamese lives, and an estimated of 1,600 North Vietnamese lives. Despite this battle being a victory for our side, it has further fueled American citizens' disapproval over this war, many questioning how many lives must be lost for this cause.
Now let's explore the fashion trends of this year that played a large part in our culture. Women wore shorter skirts, knee-high boots, turtlenecks, pantsuits, and patterned tights. Men wore sweaters. Bolos were worn by both men and women. Overall, many individuals engaged in the leopard print trend in their wardrobe. Now let's take a look at some outfit submissions of our viewers showing some of their personal picks that represent fashion in 1967. Moving on from fashion, let's give a spotlight to one of the most famous movie stars of this year, Rod Steiger. In the blockbuster film In the Heat of the Night, Steiger starred as Bill Gillespie. With a box office of $24.3 million, Steiger certainly captured the attention of movie viewers all throughout the country. I'm definitely looking forward to Steiger's appearance at the Oscars next year. Let's see if he wins!
Hello everyone! Glad to see you back here in 1967. I'm here for another infamous financial wrap. Still full-fledged in the Vietnam War, our economy saw both an increased national debt and an increase in production. But most importantly, a continuation of military production caused an increase in available jobs for manufacturing. The United States gross national product is at $868.30 billion, with a per capita income of $4,370. And our national debt is at $326 billion with a 38% debt to GDP ratio. This year also followed with a variety of inventions in American consumer goods. Several foods and refreshments such as the Big Mac and Gatorade sweep the nation with their addictive flavors. Additionally, Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speed showed how manufacturers valued automobile style over safety and sparked new provisions for safety standards regarding vehicles and road traffic safety. Lastly, the pocket calculator was invented by Texas Instruments for further growth in mathematics. That's all for this year's economic wrap, and I hope to see you here in 1968. Bye!
Welcome back to another World News segment. Today, tensions with North Korea rise. On January 23rd, the USS Pueblo, a U.S. Navy intelligence vessel, engaged in a routine surveillance of the North Korean coast when it was intercepted by North Korean patrol boats. According to the reports we are receiving, the USS Pueblo was in international waters, approximately 16 miles from shore, but the North Koreans began to use their guns on the lightly armed vessel and forced it to surrender. The Americans on the boat attempted to escape, so the North Koreans opened fire, wounding the commander and 5 others. The Americans managed to destroy any classified information abroad before inevitably being captured, and finally the Pueblo was boarded by the North Koreans and taken to Wonsan, where the 83-man crew were charged with spying within North Korea's 12-mile territorial limit and imprisoned. The United States maintained that the Pueblo had been in international waters and demanded the release of the captive sailors. However, President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered no retaliation, as most of his focus remained on Vietnam. Instead, he had began a military buildup within the area, causing many citizens to fear the entry of America into yet another war. On January 31st, during the Vietnamese New Year, North Vietnam attacked more than 100 cities and outposts in South Vietnam. This attack, going by the name of Tet Offensive, resulted in 27 key South Vietnamese cities, including the capital Saigon, being ambushed. It was reported that the U.S. and South Vietnamese casualties numbered to about 12,727 soldiers, including more than 2,600 fatalities, in addition to the 7,721 civilians killed and the 18,516 wounded. The US and South Vietnam managed a military victory, but this attack proved to be a North Vietnamese strategy victory. It would display the unwavering nationalism of the North Vietnamese and their headstrong determination to be the victors of this conflict. The difficulty of the war became completely clear to the US military after this attack, and American disapproval of its involvement heightened. In response, President Lyndon B. Johnson requested that 200,000 new troops be sent to Vietnam, further angering the citizens. Breaking news. A letter sent from a soldier currently stationed in Vietnam has just been leaked, revealing the terrible deeds of the U.S. military in a Vietnamese village called My Lai, now being called the My Lai Massacre. On March 16th, a company of American soldiers, after being ordered to do so by Lieutenant William Calley, brutally killed most of the people, women, children, and old men included, in the village of My Lai. More than 500 people were slaughtered in this massacre, including young girls and women who were raped and mutilated before being killed. The contents of the letter state that part of the American Division's 11th Infantry Briads received word that Viet Cong guerrillas had taken control of the neighboring village of Sun Mi. Calley's troops were sent to the area for a search and destroy mission. However, upon arrival, the soldiers found no Viet Cong and only a few weapons, but Calley still ordered his men to begin shooting the villagers. The massacre only ended after Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson, an Army helicopter pilot, landed his aircraft between the soldiers and retreating villagers and threatened to open fire if they continued their attacks. By that point, though, 504 people were dead. The victims consisted of 182 women, 17 pregnant, and 173 children, 56 of them infants. The revelation of the My Lai massacre caused hatred for the war to skyrocket even further. The soldiers in Vietnam have been nicknamed baby killers by a majority of the country, and citizens have begun to question what other atrocities the military has done. And just last night, on March 31st, in LBJ's address to the country, he announced that he would freeze U.S. troops, scale back bombing, and would not be a candidate of the 1968 presidency. This address pleased many, however, outrage has not calmed down. Protests of Vietnam continue to go on around the nation, and LBJ remains heavily unpopular.
Breaking news! We have just received details about the murder of one of America's most prized civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King Jr., on the evening of March 16th. While standing on the balcony of his room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, King was shot and severely wounded. A few moments later, he was found dead in the hospital. Today, the nation mourns the loss of one of the most inspirational and passionate leaders in American history. Our deepest condolences are sent to King's family, friends, and acquaintances. In response to his demise, nationwide riots have been taking place, and some have even gotten ugly. National Guardsmen are occupying the streets of our nation to calm the violence that has ensued after the assassination of King. I can assure you that King's impact will be remembered for ages to come, and I commemorate him for the effort he has put into bringing justice to our country. News has just come in on today, June 25th, that Robert F. Kennedy, brother to former President John F. Kennedy, was brutally assassinated immediately after winning the California primaries for the presidential election of 1968. The suspected assassin, Sirhan Sirhan, reportedly committed his death out of political opposition to Kennedy's pro-Israel views as a Palestinian. Today, the nation grieves at the loss of one of the prime runners for the Democratic nomination, leaving only Hubert Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy to battle for the victory. The lifestyle of the rebellious hippie may seem peculiar to some of you. That's why we have asked the hippie to send a video of their daily lives to show the rest of the nation their unique traditions. Enjoy!
Hi, my name is Flora, and this is the day in my life as a part of the counterculture revolution. I like to wear a lot of loose-fitted clothing. Makes me feel free, very flowy. A lot of color too. Color is nice. It's expressive. Today I'm wearing this shift dress. I cut off the sleeves so I could move more freely. This is my favorite scarf and belt. These are my fancy boots just for this interview, but usually I like to wear open-toed shoes, sandals. Yeah. Yes, of course. Follow me. This is the bedroom. It's tiny, yes, but it fits 6 people. You know, a little blanket on the floor, we cuddle together. It's nice. And this is the kitchen. And here, cook, obviously. Also the little buns, the ecstasy. I like to listen to music, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, obviously, but also John Lennon, Led Zeppelin. Oh, you have to listen to this song. It's my favorite right now. Inagata Devita by Ian Butterfield. Very nice, very groovy. And I like to go to a lot of music festivals too. We the people should be free, no wars, no religion. Just stay away from all your troubles and you'll reach true euphoria. Goodbye, Anne. Goodbye.
Attention everyone, a new grassroots movement has transpired this July. This movement is known as the American Indian Movement, or AIM, led by Indigenous activist Russell Means. AIM was created to help spread awareness about the indigenous tribes and their beliefs, desires, and experiences. This movement has a few goals, such as having more land returned to them, democratizing their local government, and gaining greater respect for their culture. AIM desires to unite the indigenous groups and work to fight brutality and racism in the American system. I wish the best for the success, and I hope that AIM can motivate systematic change in America.
On the night of August 20th, approximately 200,000 Warsaw Pact troops and 5,000 tanks invaded Czechoslovakia to crush the trend of liberalization surging through the communist country. Pro-Soviet communists initially seized control of Czechoslovakia's democratic government in 1948, when Joseph Stalin imposed his will on Czechoslovakia's communist leaders and transformed the country to run as a Stalinist state. This continued until 1964, when the gradual fall towards liberalization began. By 1966, students and intellectuals began to agitate for changes to education and an end to censorship. Slovakian leaders such as Alexander Dubček and Gustav Husak opposed this change in ideals and accused the central government of being dominated by its citizens. After this, an invasion plan was put to scale and the Soviets began their attack. Czechoslovakians protested the invasion heavily with public demonstrations and other nonviolent tactics, but they were no match for the Soviet tanks. The liberal reforms that the country had recently passed were repealed, and normalization, or in other words, extreme communism, began under the new leader of Czechoslovakia, Gustav Husak.
The KSL Democratic National Convention has just concluded after impassioned riots filled the streets for hours. The race for the Democratic nomination was between candidates Eugene McCarthy and Hubert Humphrey. Nearly 2 months ago, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated by Arab immigrant Sirhan Sirhan, who was angered by Kennedy's pro-Israel views at the California primaries. Leaving only 2 candidates, the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago is capturing the attention of many families today. Mayor Richard Daley, worried of potential rioting from protesters, demanded the Chicago police to enforce the curfew of 11 p.m. After calling in the National Guard to help calm the commotion, the debate over the Vietnam War issue took place, causing a riot of 15,000 protesters. The protesters tried to contain the crowd from moving towards the amphitheater of the convention, but they resorted to violence when the protesters tested their nerves, being individuals for assaulting the officers both verbally and physically. As the protesters moved to the Hilton Hotel, fighting between the agitators and the police continued to escalate. While still unclear of the cause, the police fired tear gas at the crowd and finally beat them to make the protesters disperse. Just a few hours later, Hubert Humphrey was elected candidate for the Democratic Party, ending the bloody Democratic Convention. Americans, both angry and in shock, collectively took a sigh of relief this evening, knowing that the gruesome protests of the past few days had finally come to an end. The day has finally come, November 5th, 1968. It's Election Day. The results seem to be very close, as Republican candidate Richard Nixon and Democratic candidate Hubert Humphrey to nearly the same amount of popular votes. The American Independent Party's candidate George C. Wallace has gained an astonishing number of popular votes, totaling to nearly 13%. The votes are being converted into electoral votes at this moment. The presidential race of 1968 appears very sharply divided, and it is difficult to even predict who will win. I have just gotten news of the winner of the presidential election of 1968. Our 37th President of the United States of America goes to Richard Nixon. Congratulations, Nixon and his supporters. I'm excited to see this drastic change from the Democratic LBJ to the Republican Nixon. The time has finally come for the 40th Academy Awards in 1968. The most nominated films of the night were tied between Bonnie and Clyde and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner for 10 nominations each. The hit film, In the Heat of the Night, received a whopping 5 awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor in a Leading Role for Rod Steiger. The award for Best Actress in a Leading Role was given to Katharine Hepburn for her work in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. The 40th Oscars proved to be a big night for many skilled entertainers. Congratulations to all who won! Now shall we discuss the ongoing division between pro-war hawks and anti-war doves? These two groups have been arguing both politically and socially, but what exactly do each of these groups desire? Hawks most importantly want the United States to do all that was necessary to win the war against Vietnam, and of course, communism. These hawks believe that the United States was compelled to join the war due to the aggressiveness of North Vietnam towards South Vietnam. Doves, on the other hand, said the war was merely a civil war that should have remained between just the Vietnamese. These doves, although rightfully deemed as objecting to the draft, believe that the money that was going towards the war effort could have been better spent in programs that would improve the nation domestically. Furthermore, the doves were upset at the fact that a large number of Americans were dying in the war while the cause for the war was still ambiguous. Now, with a better understanding of their motives, which one of these groups do you personally align with?
Welcome back to our annual financial wrap. I hope you've enjoyed our previous segments, but now I'm going to inform you about all you need to know about our current economic standing. We're still plunged deep into the Vietnam War, causing a sharp increase in gross national product and national debt. Let's take a look at those stats. Our gross national product reached $952.3 billion, almost a $100 billion increase since 1967, with a per capita income of $4,740. The national debt increased to $348 billion with a 37% debt to GDP ratio. I'm assuming you know what time it is. Time for the annual inventions of 1968. To start off, Roy Jacuzzi created the infamous integrated whirlpool jacuzzi, bringing comfort and relaxation to your hot tub. Additionally, Jocelyn Bell discovered the first radio pulsars, allowing U.S. scientists to discover more information about space. The expansive American Technology Corporation, Intel, was founded, which enlarged America's technological experience. One other notable invention was Hot Wheels, the toy car which fascinated children across the nation and simultaneously drained parents' bank accounts to pay for their child's collections. That wraps up the economy of this year, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I can't wait to see you next time.
And that brings us to the closing of today's Wrap of the Past from 1966 to 1968. These years were full of many divisions both within the United States and around the world. High tensions plagued the globe, resulting in many wars and constant fear. The United States itself was full of hostility as citizens fought against each other and the government over equality, involvement in Vietnam, and handling of the Cold War. The country would continue to be split by opinions and beliefs throughout the 70s, even after fully pulling out of the Vietnam War. It would take an act of terrorism, or the events of September 11, 2001, before the country would be fully united under undivided nationalism, but we'll discuss that more in a future episode. That is all for today's ADD News. Thank you for watching.